Let us start with Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Honorable President. The Syrian civil war has impacted devastating consequences on our people, our institutions, and our homeland. The conflict has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, displaced millions within and beyond our borders, left vital infrastructure in ruins. Entire cities has been destroyed. This is not merely a Syrian crisis; it is a human crisis, one that demands the urgent attention and action of the global community. The Syrian people have suffered under the weight of violence and economic collapse. We urge the internations and its member states to redouble their efforts in supporting a comprehensive political solution under the framework of Resolution 2254, which emphasizes the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. Peace cannot be achieved without dialogue, reconciliation, and unwavering support of the international community. This war has created huge migration of Syrians to other countries. So, we call on the United Nations and donor countries to facilitate the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of Syrian refugees to their homeland. Rebuilding Syria is essential for addressing the root causes of migration crisis. Let us not allow the Syrian crisis to fade into the background of global affairs. The Syrian people deserve peace, dignity, and opportunity to rebuild their lives. We urge you stand with us, to work with us, and to act now to ensure the next chapter of Syrian story is one of resilience, recovery, and renewal. Thank you.
Representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President, Honorable Chair, esteemed colleagues, and distinguished delegates. We meet today to discuss a matter of great international concern, the Syrian civil war. Давайте сама начала. Yes, называем. Давайте сама начала. Yes, называем. Русия решилento позерeshва Сирийскую Арабскую Республику и законной правилица президента Башара Асада.
Let us be clear from the outset, Russia stands resolutely with the Syrian Arab Republic and the legitimate government of President Bashar al-Assad.
Madam President, for many years, we have witnessed the scourge of terrorism ravage Syria. Extremist groups such as ISIS and al-Nusra have not only worsened the sufferings of civilians, it also destabilized the region and undermined the sovereignty of Syria. It is our firm belief, Madam President, that the sovereignty of nations must be respected, and it is the Syrian people's right to determine their own future free from foreign interference and external imposition of regime change. Madam President, Russia's intervention in Syria is not one of the aggression, but one of the assistance responding to an official request from the Syrian government. We have provided air support, military assistance, and intelligence to the Syrian armed forces, helping them reclaim vast territories from the terrorists and foreign backed insurgents. Through this support, we have not only assisted in the defense of Syria's sovereignty, but also worked towards the defeat of those who seek to undermine the region's sovereignty. Madam President, let us not forget that the United States and its allies had carried out military operations in Syria without the consent of the Syrian government. This continued occupations of parts of Syrian territory under the guise of countering terrorism is violation to the very principle of state sovereignty and territorial integrity. Madam President, Russia remains committed to a political solution, a solution that must be driven by the Syrian people without any imposition or arbitrary timelines. We support the United Nations led peace process, including the work of Constitutional Committee. It is only through genuine dialogue and restoration that the national unity that Syria will raise from the ashes of the war. Thank you.
Delegate of USA.
Honorable Chair, esteemed colleagues, and distinguished delegates. Today, we gather at a critical junction for Syria and for the wider region. The Syrian civil war, now in its 14th year, has brought unprecedented devastation, causing over 5 lakh deaths. I repeat, over 5 lakh deaths, displacing millions and leaving country in the ruins. The suffering of Syrian people can't be ignored, and the international community must continue to act in order to alleviate that suffering, because it is the largest civil war after American Civil War in 1861. We empathize the pain and suffering of Syrian people because we are also the victims of that trauma. The United States has been unwavering in its commitment to Syrian people. We have provided billions of dollars in humanitarian assistance, supporting refugees and internally displaced persons and we have been at the forefront of providing life-saving aid to those who are suffering from war ravages. The Syrian government may have invited Russia, but I must remind that it is a country which is broken into pieces in 1991 and now going to help the stability of another country. What an irony, madam. What an irony. Also, let us not forget that it is the same government that has terrorized its own people. The people of Syria have been subjected to airstrikes, chemical weapons, and gross rights violation by their own government. Russia's continued support of regime change only enables and perpetuates these atrocities. The so-called supporter, that is Russia, is very human towards Syria, but why the circumstances are different regarding Ukraine? The world is clearly witnessing Russia's double standards. Regarding Russia's claim that has violated Syria's sovereignty, then what those people do with Belarus and their allies. And I must remind that the members of this assembly, the United States, has acted in Syria in accordance with international law. The United States has been worked with local partners, including Syrian Democratic Forces, to combat the very real threat posed by ISIS and other terrorist organizations. It is not an intervention to regime change, it is a direct effort to eradicate terrorist groups that have been spread terror across the globe, including the United States and our allies. The United States stands firmly with the Syrian people in their pursuit of peace, freedom, and dignity. We will continue to support efforts that counter terrorism, promote humanitarian aid, and advance a genuine political solution to the Syrian civil war. Thank you.
Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. Iran stands firmly with Russia in supporting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. The Syrian government, led by the President Assad, is the legitimate authority, and it is a right to protect the foreign country from foreign-backed insurgents and extremist groups. The US and its allies have prolonged the conflict by arming and funding the opposition forces that have destabilized Syria, worsening the humanitarian crisis. The foreign intervention, including the US support for anti-government factions, only exacerbates the sufferings of Syrian people. Furthermore, Russia and Iran have been crucial in delivering the humanitarian aid to those in need, ensuring it reaches all regions of Syria, not just those controlled by the opposition forces. It is clear that US have politicized the humanitarian assistance, using it as a leverage to undermine the Syria's sovereignty. We must respect Syria's right to self-determination, and Iran remains committed to supporting Syria's legitimate government in its battle against terrorism and external interference. Thank you.
Delegate of Germany.
Honorable President, Deutschland understood the USA nachdrücklich in ihren Bemühungen, die Gewalt in Syrien in Ende zu setzen.
Germany firmly supports the United States in its efforts to bring an end to the violence in Syria.
The primary threat to the Syrian stability is not foreign intervention, but the brutality of Assad regime, which has committed countless atrocities against its own people, including the use of chemical weapons. The US has acted in Syria to combat ISIS and other terrorist organizations, working alongside local forces like Syrian Democratic Forces to safeguard civilian lives. Russia's claims of defending Syrian sovereignty ring hollow when the Assad regime has shown no respect for the basic rights of its citizens. Germany advocates for a peaceful political transition in Syria, one that reflects the will of the people and not continued tyranny of Assad. A lasting peace can only be achieved when all Syrians are included in political process, free from the repression and violence, and Germany will continue to support the US efforts in seeking such a solution. Thank you.
Delegate of Colombia.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished delegates, the Syrian civil war stands as a stark reminder of devastating consequences of foreign interference. Let me give an example of the blame game played by the two superpower nations. These nations play a game same like Tom and Jerry, where they blame each other after all the destruction. Both the US and the Russia culprits are prolonging and deepening this conflict and turning Syria into a battleground. Russia's military intervention on the name of support to Syrian government has resulted in widespread destruction, countless civilian casualties, and the entrenchment of authoritarianism. Meanwhile, the USA, under the banner of promoting democracy and combating extremism, it has fueled up many chaos by arming various political factions. So, the international community must hold both nations accountable for all their strategic ambitions over the lives of many lives of Syrians. It is a time to demand an external meddling and to prioritize the political situation grounded. Thank you.
Thank you all the participants. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open for the discussion on the European migration crisis. We will begin with the opening statement of Germany.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great concern that Germany addresses the gravity of European migration crisis. Over the past 5 years, Germany has experienced a substantial influence of migrants. More than 1 million had been counted in the Germany past 5 years, particularly from the regions of North Africa and the Middle East, including Syria. Our systems are under immense pressure. The challenges we face are not just logical, they are humanitarian. We have witnessed the suffering of thousands of people fleeing war, poverty, and violence. Germany has always advocated for solidarity within the European Union, but we can no longer bear the burden alone. It is imperative that all nations, especially those on the front line, take more responsibility. The crisis is not only a European issue but a global one. We must come together to offer both immediate relief and long term solutions. We too have taken in thousands of migrants, yet we must question the lack of responsibility taken by those who directly cause these migratory flows. Germany calls for a strong stand against these nations and demands that they be held accountable for their role in exhibiting the crisis. Thank you.
Delegate of Cambodia.
Madam President, I feel so weird that they feel Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not the Europe's problems. I feel pity for Europe that they need a wake-up call. That's not how it works in 21st century. Europe wanted to develop within its own space and to keep international problems as far away as possible. Europe has to grow out of this mindset. Thank you.
Representative of France.
Thank you, Ms. President. While we acknowledge the severity of the migration crisis, France must make it clear that the root cause of this situation are imbibed in the regions from where people migrated. Countries in the North Africa, such as Libya, Nigeria, and in the Middle East, especially Syria, have failed to stabilize and create conditions for their people to thrive. These nations have destabilized our continent. In 2023 alone, France received over 150,000 asylum applications, and it is one of the largest recipients of migrants in Europe. We have opened our doors and taken in thousands of migrants fleeing violence, war, and economic despair. However, we must ask, what is the responsibility of these nations and their leaders? How long will be France expected to absorb all the consequences of political instability that we did not create? In terms of our own policies, France has been proactive. We have enhanced our border security, strengthened partnerships with other European nations, and to manage migration flows more effectively. We strongly condemn the new migrations from these nations, and we demand that the international community take a stronger and more responsible role regarding the resolving of the causes of this migration. We will no longer accept a situation where the responsibility of those countries falls solely on those countries who have worked tirelessly to maintain stability, like France. Thank you.
Delegate of Italy.
Thank you, Honorable President. Italy shares many of France's concerns. As a Mediterranean nation, we have seen the effects of uncontrolled migration. Nearly 155,000 people are migrated to Italy in the year of 2023, in which most of them are arrived by sea. While we sympathize with those who are feeling conflict, we cannot ignore the fact the countries in North Africa, such as Sudan and Libya, are directly contributing to the mass movements of people into Europe. Moreover, Syria, with its ongoing conflict, continues to push moves of refugees towards our shores. Italy coastal lines are overwhelmed. We recognize the suffering of Syrian people, but this crisis cannot be borne by Europe alone. It requires the international urgent intervention to bring about peace and stability in the region. Italy also condemns policies that exacerbate the migration crisis. Smuggling network and absence of effective governance in North Africa directly contributing to the chaos. And Italy demands that this nation implement stricter measures to control migration flows. We demand thus these countries take greater responsibilities for their own security and stabilization, as well as that of their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished representative of Germany, France, and Italy. The delegate of Libya.
Thank you, Honorable President. Libya is fully aware of migration crisis and difficult circumstances many migrants face. However, it is important to note that Libya has been a victim of instability. We are a nation in the midst of a civil war struggling with internal conflicts and breakdown of our institutions. We simply do not have the resources to manage massive number of people passing through our country. The European countries must understand that without international support, we cannot handle the tide of migration. Rather than blaming us, Europe should assist in stabilizing our country and help build our capacity to manage these challenges. Thank you.
Delegate of Sudan.
Honorable Chair, we stand with Libya for calling international aid and support. Sudan has to experience pressures of migration, both internally and externally. However, it is critical note to the Sudan is not solely responsible for this crisis. We have made many efforts to secure our borders, but we cannot do it so alone. Poverty, political instability, and lack of opportunities. We urge the international community work together, not to blame each other, but to seek the solutions we can address both symptoms and root causes of this crisis. Thank you.
Representative of Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished delegates, Nigeria acknowledges the concerns raised by the Germany, France, Italy regarding the migration crisis. But we must need to address the unfair categorization of the nations like Nigeria has contributed to this challenge. Migration is a complex and global issue where driven by the factors such as poverty, insecurity, climate change, and inequality. Nigeria is actively working to address its domestic challenges, including combating extremist groups like Boko Haram and fostering economic growth for our population over 230 million people. Migration is not a failure of the governance, it is often the results of individuals seeking the better opportunities in the absence of equitable global systems. To address this crisis, we call for the increased international support and development initiatives in the absence of initiatives in the countries of origin, enhanced cooperation between the Europe and Africa to create sustainable livelihoods and stronger collaborations to dismantle the human trafficking networks. Nigeria is committed to playing its part, but these challenges require the shared global effort but not unilateral blame. Thank you.
Finally, I call the delegate of Syria.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Syria has been at the epicenter of conflict for a decade, and we understand the challenges that Europe faces with the displacement of Syrians. However, we must remind this assembly that is not fault of Syrians. The millions people have fled their homes. It is the devastating efforts of foreign intervention, terrorism, and years of war that have forced 2 million people seek the refuge abroad. We are not sending people to Europe intentionally. We are witnessing the destructions of our country. What Syria needs is not blame, but end the conflict, rebuild our nation, and offer hope to our citizens. Europe must support to effort to bring to peace to Syria, and doing so we can hope for a solution that reduce the migration flows. Thank you.
Thank you to all the distinguished delegates for your insights. It is clear that the migration crisis is complex, multifaceted issues and its resolution will require cooperation, empathy and shared responsibility from all the nations involved. Let us now move to the further discussion. Distinguished delegates, the debate focused on the topic sanctions on Russia, justified measures or unfair punishment. Over recent years, sanctions have become a key tool in the international response to geopolitical challenge, particularly following Russia action in Ukraine and other global incidents. We will invite them to start the debate. The delegate of United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chairperson. Our country strongly supports the sanctions imposed on Russia as a necessary response to its illegal and aggressive actions, particularly the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. These actions are a blatant violations of the international law and the United Nations Charter, which calls for the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the all nations to be respected. As our former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stated in Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is an attack on democracy and the rule of law. We stand with Ukraine and will continue to hold Russia accountable. The sanctions target key sectors of the Russian economy, such as energy, finance, and defense, to pressure the Kremlin into changing its behavior. They are designed to impact the Russian economy and its ability to fund aggression while minimizing harm to ordinary Russian citizens. These measures are not just about punishing bad behavior, they are about sending a clear message. Violations of international law and humanitarian rights will not be tolerated. The sanctions are supported by a coalition of allies, the United States and the European Union and others, showcasing a united front against this aggression. Thank you.
Representative of Russian Federation.
Madam President, the Russian Federation firmly opposes the sanctions imposed on us, which we consider illegal, unfair, and politically motivated. These sanctions are not about justice or peace. They are tools of economic warfare designed to weaken Russia and undermine its sovereignty. As our Honorable President Vladimir Putin have stated that the sanctions are a hostile act against the Russian people, aimed at stifling our economy and destabilizing our nation. They will not succeed. Let us be clear. The situation in Ukraine is complex with deep historical, cultural, and political roots. Western nations, including the United Kingdom, have chosen to ignore these complexities and instead blame Russia for all region's problems. Sanctions have done nothing to resolve the conflict. Instead, they have increased global economic instability, hurt international trade, and worsened the energy crisis. Furthermore, these sanctions violate the principle of free trade and disproportionately affect developing countries by driving up energy prices and food shortage. Russia calls for constructive dialogue, not coercive measures to address international dispute. Thank you.
We will now proceed to rebels. The United Kingdom may respond first.
Thank you, madam. While Russia claims the sanctions are unjustified, the reality is that they are the direct response to its violations of the international law. The annexation of Crimea and the destabilization of eastern Ukraine and attack on the Ukrainian sovereignty are not the complex issues, they are acts of aggression. The sanctions are not aimed at the Russian people but at the leadership and the key sectors that fund this aggression. They are designed to pressure the Kremlin to respect international norms. As our Foreign Secretary James cleverly stated that sanctions are not a choice we take lightly, but they are necessary to defend democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Furthermore, the global coalition support these measures reflecting their legitimacy. The sanctions are part of a broader strategy, including the diplomatic efforts and the military aid to Ukraine, to ensure peace and stability in the region. Thank you, madam.
Russia may now respond.
United Kingdom speaks of international norms, yet it ignores the principle of respect for sovereignty. This situation in Ukraine is a result of Western interference, NATO's expansion, and disregard of Russia's security concerns. The sanctions are a continuation of this hostility. As our Honorable President Putin stated, we have the right to defend our national interest and ensure the safety of our borders. Sanctions are an attempt to force Russia into submission, but they only strengthen our resolve. The sanctions harm not only Russia but global economy, exacerbating the energy and food crisis. Developing countries are suffering as Western nations prioritize their political agendas over global well-being. We call on the United Kingdom and its allies to lift these sanctions and engage in genuine dialogue. Coercion will not lead to peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Russia. We will now open the floor for the observer intervention. North Korea, you may now proceed.
Mr. President, the sanctions on Russia are unlawful and illegitimate. We warn the countries who are involved in the politically motivated sanctions that they would face a dear price. If they still attach themselves to the useless sanctions, we will let them do that 100 or 1000 times they think the world runs on the rules made by them. But their rules are ineffective. Did they ever think the consequences of these sanctions on global energy and food security?
United Kingdom.
Madam President, in answer to the question of the Kim Korea, sorry, it's a North Korea. We acknowledge the challenges posed by the sanctions, but the alternative allowing violations of international law to go unchecked would have even greater consequences. The UK is working with allies to mitigate the impact on global energy and food supplies, including increasing humanitarian aid to affected regions. These measures are necessary to uphold the international rules based order. Thank you, Madam.
Delegate of Italy.
Madam President, Italy strongly condemns Russia's actions, particularly its ongoing invasion of Ukraine, calling for immediate cessation of hostilities, adherence to international law. We urge the international community to stand united in holding Russia accountable for its aggression. Russia, how do you justify your actions in Ukraine that have led to this international backlash? Thank you.
Russian Federation.
The sanctions imposed by Western nations are unjust and illegal as they violate international laws and the principle of the state sovereignty. Russia contends that the sanctions are politically motivated. The actions in Ukraine are about protecting the rights of Russian speaking population and addressing security threats posed by NATO's expansion. The West has manipulated the narrative to demonize Russia while ignoring its own provocations. We remain open to dialogue based on mutual respect and security guarantees.
The representative of South Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. We hope these sanctions would act as a medicine to deadly virus called Russia. The masters and the servants think they act that they wish without respecting international laws and sovereignty of their neighbors. The new sanctions serve as a strong warning those dealing with the designated Russian entities and financial institutions. By targeting Russia's illicit, South Korea is demonstrating its commitment to implement UNSC resolution and increase pressure on North Korea and Russia.
United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam. We, the Great British, imposing sanctions on Russian Federation, and you, Russia, be ready to face the consequences.
Russian Federation.
I think they forgot it's 21st century. The sun has already set. You're no longer the dictator of the world, UK.
I request both the sides to maintain peace and take the concurrent under developed and developing countries into consideration before taking any action. Moving on the next time for today, terrorist group activity of Iran that are serious threat that international peace and security. Now open the floor for the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Madam President. We condemn terrorism in all its forms, manifestations, and sharing our experience in preventing and countering terrorism, like violent extremism and radicalization, cross border terrorism, travel and financing terrorism. We, Italy, give our support for a comprehensive approach in preventing and combating terrorism based on respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The rule of law and international law, emphasizing the importance of an effective prosecution of those responsible for terrorist acts, and condemning all kind of nation who support to terrorism. Madam President, Italy remained one of the top troops which contributes to NATO, European Union, the United Nations, and other bilateral and multilateral operations to promote global security, with a particular focus on a wider Mediterranean region. Not only that, Italians, along with US authorities, regularly share our best practices under the auspices of the US. Italy Counter Terrorism Working Group. Not only that, Italy is working to improve our screening,
including for terrorism of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. Thank you.
Representative of United States.
Thank you, Madam President. We fight, as we all fight, for just peace. A peace that favors liberty. We'll defend the peace against the threat from terrorists and tyrants, as terrorism costed to human dignity. The US national security strategy will be based on distinctly American internationalism that reflects the union of our values and our national interest. Because of terrorist groups in Iran, which caused a violence around the Mediterranean Sea, the roots had been of the major problem caused by it. The aim of our strategy is to help make the world not just safer but better. Our goals to progress are clear political and economic freedom, peaceful relations with other states, and respect for human dignity. And this path is not America's alone, it is open to all. To achieve these goals, the United Nations will to combat terrorism. Thank you.
Delegate of Iran.
Thank you, Honorable President. A country which is an oppressive power as the United States, which is trying to establish a global dictatorship and serve its own interests, is dominating other nations and trampling on their rights. There is an immediate need for Iran to protect ourselves from an external interference into our domestic affairs. They're saying that we're creating constant hurdles in the Mediterranean Sea region. But in reality, all we are trying to do is protect ourselves and our nation from the rivalries and to have a peaceful border. United States is presenting about the peace while standing behind the Italy. But did they just forget their role as a creator of disturbances and instabilities across the world? They speak of democracy while overthrowing the governments that were formed by the trust of the people. The West not only fails to seek the global cooperation called for by our Secretary General, but in its documents openly and harshly accuses Russia, China, Belarus, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Iran of creating threats to its dominance. Thank you.
Delegate of Costa Rica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Costa Rica firmly believes in the principles of international law, dialogue, and multilateralism as the bedrock of global peace and cooperation. While we recognize the importance of addressing international security concerns, we must express our concern about the unilateral sanctions on Iran. These measures often disproportionately harm innocent civilians, undermine the well being of millions, and exacerbate global economic instability. Such actions risk sidelining multilateral institutions, eroding trust, and setting dangerous precedents for addressing international disputes. We have seen the examples of Cuba, Russia, Libya, Iraq, and North Korea. So, Costa Rica urges the United States and international community to prioritize constructive engagement and diplomacy to resolve conflicts in a manner that upholds the principles of justice and humanity rather than relying on coercive economic measures. Thank you.
Welcome back to General Assembly. Distinguished delegates, the next discussion focus on cross-border terrorism between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We will begin with Afghanistan.
Honorable President and delegates, Afghanistan has long been a victim of cross-border terrorism. Groups like the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Haqqani network are using Pakistani territory to launch attacks, destabilizing our country and undermining our sovereignty. Despite repeated calls for action, Pakistan state agencies, including the ISI, are providing financial, logistical, and operational support to these groups. This support is not just an attack on Afghanistan, but on global peace. Terrorism thrives because of Pakistan's unwillingness to dismantle Pakistan terrorist safe havens. We urge the international community to hold Pakistan accountable for its actions and support Afghanistan's right to peace and stability. Words are no longer enough. Only decisive action will bring lasting peace. Thank you.
The representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan strongly denies Afghanistan baseless accusations. Pakistan has sacrificed over 80,000 of lives and incurred billions economic losses and fighting terrorism through operations like Zarabi Azab and Radwulizab. It is Pakistan, cleared terrorist safe havens with within our border. However, Afghanistan's failure to secure its side's porous border has allowed militants to attack Pakistan through groups like Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, which is targeting Pakistanis, civilians and security forces. Instead of blame games, we need constructive dialogues and joint efforts to combat terrorism, which affects us all. Pakistan remains committed to regional peace. Thank you.
The representative of Bhutan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We stand firmly with Afghanistan. Pakistan is a country which is motherland of terrorism and its economy is run by the terrorist organizations. And they act as victims, mislead us by saying the combating terrorism. Pakistan history harboring terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and other were well documented UN Office of Counter-Terrorism. These groups are not only destabilize the Afghanistan economy, threaten regional and global security. Pakistan combating terrorism, hollow states insurgencies and sponsor insurgencies. The international community must act on directly hold Pakistan accountable. Supporting terrorism is not a domestic issue; it's a crime against humanity. We support Afghanistan demand an independent investigation into cross-border terrorism. The international community must confirm our country supports Afghanistan call for justice. Thank you.
Delegate of Tajikistan.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Our country acknowledges Afghanistan's immense sacrifices in its fight against terrorism. However, Pakistan's double standards claiming to fight terrorism while harboring terrorist networks undermine regional stability. The Haqqani network under the ISIS continue to operate freely from Pakistan. These groups have jeopardized Afghanistan's sovereignty and caused instability across South Asia. Our country calls on Pakistan to dismantle terrorist infrastructure and demonstrate genuine commitment to peace. Transparency and accountability are essential for ending this cycle of violence. Thank you.
Representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Chairperson. Pakistan rejects the accusations made by Afghanistan and its allies. Our military operations have successfully dismantled terrorist networks and within our country. Territory. The claims of safe havens are outdated and misleading. Bhutan's statement is particularly hypocritical. We know who influences your statements, and India sponsors insurgent activities in Balochistan to destabilize Pakistan's. Afghanistan's inability to control its territory allows territory groups to launch attacks on Pakistan. Pakistan proposes joint border management and intelligence sharing to address these issues. But finger pointing will not lead to peace. Thank you.
Delegate of Afghanistan.
Mr. President, Pakistan's rebuttal ignores overwhelming evidence. Reports from the United Nations and global watchdogs confirm the existence of terrorist safe havens in Pakistan. These groups are not remnants. They are actively supported by Pakistan state agencies. The fencing of Durand line is a unilateral move that violates Afghan sovereignty. Genuine peace requires Pakistan to take accountability for its actions. Afghanistan is ready for cooperation, but only if Pakistan shows sincerity. Thank you.
Representative of Nepal.
So, Pakistan must act transparently to eliminate terrorist networks, because if you have snakes in your backyard, you can't expect them to bite only your neighbors. Eventually, they'll bite the people who keep them in the backyard. Not only that, without accountability, there can be no peace in the region. Thank you.
Any questions? The delegate of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to ask question to the delegate of Pakistan that how do you respond to international report confirming terrorist safe havens at your borders?
Representative of Pakistan.
I just want to ask question to Kazakhstan. On what basis blaming Pakistan? Pakistan independently conducted many operations and dismantled many terrorist groups and their activities. Our military forces have that capacity. Thank you.
Representative of Saudi Arabia.
I have a question to both Afghanistan and Pakistan. How can regional cooperation improve regional security?
Delegate of Afghanistan.
Regional cooperation requires Pakistan to end its support for terrorism.
Afghanistan supports dialogue under international mediation to ensure accountability. Chairperson, Afghanistan cannot achieve peace as long as Pakistan support terrorism. The world must act to hold Pakistan accountable and support Afghanistan's right to stability. Decisive action is needed.
Representative of Pakistan.
Cooperation is possible if trust is rebuilt. Pakistan proposes joint border patrols and intelligence sharing to address mutual security concerns. Pakistan remains committed to peace and reject false allegations. Blame games will only worsen tension. Pakistan is ready for cooperation, but Afghanistan must also take the responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, delegates. This debate highlighted key issues of cross-border terrorism. The UN urges both the nations to prioritize cooperation and accountability. I now open the floor for discussion on climate change. Firstly, I want to thank every country on making new financial commitments, putting international community closer to reach its goals, phasing out coal use in coal power plant. Now we will begin with delegate of Maldives.
Honorable Chair, esteemed colleagues and distinguished delegates, we gather here today at a delicate moment to discuss on climate change. Maldives, a country of about 550,000 people, is here raising our voice on behalf of other island nations imperiled by climate change. Firstly, we thank United Nations Environment Assembly by bringing us into limelight and gives us the opportunity to share our stories, which is critical for us. Along with adapting to climate change, Maldives is aiming to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 with international support. And we are planning to do this in part by shifting renewable energy and cutting down a short lived climate pollutants like compound used in cooling and refrigerator. We are also working to stem biodiversity loss, especially in the ocean, which is threatening most main industries, fishing and tourism. The country's strategic action plan focuses on driving growth while protecting coral reefs, which are some of the largest and most diverse in the world. Thank you.
Representative of Mauritius.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a developing country, there is a need of steps to be taken on climate change, but it's not going to be accomplished because of the country like Germany, as it has historically been a major coal-dependent nation, leading to significant carbon dioxide emissions from power generation. Also, the heavy industry sector, including steel and chemical production, contributes significantly to Germany's greenhouse gas emissions, which is finally leading to damaging of ozone layer. In the name of nuclear weapons, it is extracting more fossil fuels. The whole world too wants to know who is the reason behind the greenhouse gas emissions, as in the name of developed country.
Delegate of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany has taken significant steps to combat climate change by phasing out nuclear power, aiming to retire coal power plant by 2030. We are also heavily investing in renewable energy, implementing strict energy efficiency standards, and setting ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 65% of 1990 levels by 2030 with a target of achieving climate neutrality by 2045. Our country is utilizing market mechanisms like carbon pricing to incentivize emission reductions, funding projects to protect forests and more lands to absorb carbon dioxide. Our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emission and achieve climate neutrality by 2045. Thank you.
Delegate of United Kingdom.
Honorable President, distinguished member of United Nations, esteemed colleagues, and representatives of international community. The United Kingdom is focusing more on climate change. Like in the year 2012, nearly 40% of our power came from coal. It's now less than 1%. When I was kid, it was 70%, and that is partly because of emissions of greenhouse gases. Also, United Kingdom has committed to reducing emissions by 50% of 1990 levels by 2050. In 2020, United Kingdom set a target of 68% reduction in emissions by 2030 in our English commitments in Paris Agreement. We are also successful in phasing out coal power in 2024. Thank you.
Delegate of France.
Merci, Marsoulay President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The developing countries state that we are the major nations of carbon emissions, but in reality, the whole world knows that one of the greatest initiatives regarding climate change is taken by us, which is Paris Agreement, that's provide a durable framework guiding the global effort for decades to come. It marks the beginning of a shift towards to a net zero emissions world. Notoko of the pai eti galomo essentialo, poholoma evaluation desadada.
Our Paris Agreement is also essential for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals.
France has committed to ambitious climate goals, includes achieving the carbon neutrality by 2050, and we implemented policies like promoting renewable energy, electric vehicles, and energy efficient building renovations. France actively participated in international climate negotiations and had played a crucial role in climate finance. Thank you.
Representative of Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, what France said is true. The whole world also remembers that because your actions still contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, which includes reliance on fossil fuels for energy production, significant emissions from transportation, agricultural practices, and industrial activities. Your agricultural practices like intensive farming, livestock production release a methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Nuclear power capacity, which still relies on fossil fuels in greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Delegate of United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. USA plans to combat climate change by investing in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power, setting stricter emission standards for vehicles, and promoting energy efficiency for building and supporting research and development of carbon capture technologies. United States of America plays a vital role in mitigating climate change and addressing its impact by partnering with 45 countries to implement ambitious emission reduction measures. We also deny that only developed nations should be held accountable for climate change and contribute for climate fund. Countries with large emissions and strong economies like India and China are trying to receive climate fund in a dubious way which we oppose. If developing or nearly developed nations do not act fairly, we will not hesitate to leave the 2015 Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Delegate of New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. President. We often call for other countries to take more ambitious actions on climate change, emphasizing the needs for global response by highlighting the importance of developed nations. They must lead the way with significant emission reductions, particularly in the sectors like agriculture, where New Zealand itself faces many challenges. We are facing a problem of increasing sea level due to the climate change, which is significant threat to the coastal communities and the infrastructure from raising the sea level, particularly in the form of more frequent coastal flooding and erosion. We frequently express our support for international collaborations on innovative climate solutions, especially regarding agriculture, methane mitigation. We consider it as a key issue. Thank you.
Representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States has a significant negative impact on climate change due to its high per capita greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from burning fossil fuels for transportation, electricity generation, and industry, contributing a large portion of global emissions despite only representing a fraction of the world's populations. This leads to consequences like rising sea levels, more extreme weather events, disruption to ecosystems. As under the name of development, there are many negative impacts because of your actions. So you have to take the responsibility to overcome these impacts on other poor nations. You can achieve it through Paris Agreement. So I want to ask you, why are you dropping from such agreement? Thank you.
Diplomat of United States.
Mr. President, United States of America is officially withdrawing from Paris Agreement and we will be no longer a largest and burden contributor to climate fund because this agreement is undermining the US economy and put the USA at permanent disadvantage like inflation. And according to State of Global Climate Report by World Meteorological Department, the expected 1.5 degrees Celsius has already reached as per Paris Agreement. And despite China and India are the largest carbon emitters, why USA have to pay $500 million to climate fund. So that's why we are leaving the agreement. Signing off, USA.
Delegate of South Africa.
Mr. President, which is to protect life below water. Developed nations, primarily through their high levels of industrial activities and fossil fuel burnings, are significantly contributing to rising sea levels. We think Green Climate Fund is important for helping developing nations transition to net zero carbon economies. The, the warming atmosphere caused by the greenhouse gases leads to increased melting of Antarctica, adding to the volume of ocean water. Also, island countries like New Zealand, Madagascar, Japan, and most of the islands in Caribbean. Thank you.
I invite Marshall Islands.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we have time to change our ways, and the Green Climate Fund is one of the best initiatives to help the developing countries to combat climate change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change initiative like Green Climate Fund invest at least half of its adaptation resources in countries that are most vulnerable at least to climate change, such as small island developing states and African states. By 2024, only 30% of the Green Climate Fund has gone to least developing countries, which are not even sufficient for them to combat and achieve their goals. The problem raised here is that there is no transparency, checks and balances on Green Climate Fund. I make the opinion that there is a need for forming a commission for maintaining the transparency on Green Climate Fund. We often call on other countries to reduce their carbon emissions and support vulnerable economies. Thank you.
Thank you, respected delegates. Climate change is really challenging and deadly phenomenon. All countries must be united to counter it, keeping aside their differences and putting people's welfare as priority. Let us turn our attention towards conflicts in Caucasus region. I recognize the representative of Armenia to speak.
Mr. President, I am taking the floor in response to the atrocities by Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. The narrative of Azerbaijan is containing a number of fabricated legal, historical, political narratives and blatant disinformation. This is to distract the attention of international community from the continued policy of use of force and threat of force to achieve its expansionist goals in our region. The latest military offensive unleashed by Azerbaijan targeted the eastern and southeastern regions of Armenia, causing more than 200 deaths, including among the civilian population. At least 20 servicemen were captured. Around 8,000 people, mostly women, children, and elderly, were temporarily displaced. In flagrant violation of Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law, Azerbaijan has captured, tortured, and killed the number of Armenian service personnel. Among them, several women who were exposed to most despicable varieties, including sexual assault, violent murders, and mutilations. The fact remains that there has been no actual armed attack by Armenia against Azerbaijan. Mr. President, at the emergency meeting of UN Security Council convened on the 15th of September upon Armenia's formal request, we heard the calls of council members who have been loud and clear. The strikes inside the territory of Armenia are unacceptable. All military forces must urgently return to their initial positions and the complete ceasefire must be unconditionally observed and respected. The council members were unanimous in their appeals. There can be no military or violent solution to the conflict 12 days after the Security Council meeting. The truth here is that, sir, for many years, Azerbaijan has been consistently rejecting proposals for diplomatic settlement. Their policy is nothing short of policy of ethnic cleansing and clear genocidal intent. I am compelled to recall that it was precisely for such policy and that type of intent that the conflict erupted at first place. Hundreds of Armenians living in Azerbaijan were killed, tortured, and maimed. Hundreds of thousands were deported. Armenia will continue to appeal to the United Nations and its respective bodies as well as to the relevant national actors to stand up to the responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security, to resolutely condemn Azerbaijan's criminal attacks against the territorial integrity of Armenia and its people, for immediate repatriation of all prisoners of war and other detained persons, and to uphold the norms of international law and the values of peace and humanity. Thank you.
Representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Belgium stands with solidarity with Armenia and the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, reaffirming the principles of self-determination, justice, and human rights. The escalating humanitarian crisis, marked by forced displacements and immense suffering, demands immediate international attention. Belgium condemns any use of force that violates international law and calls for the cessation of hostilities. We urge this assembly to ensure accountability for violation of human rights and to support a sustainable, peaceful resolution that respects the people of aspirations of Nagorno-Karabakh. Belgium remains committed to multilateral dialogue and the pursuit of justice and peace. Thank you.
Diplomat of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, Israel stands firmly with the people of Armenia and the Nagorno-Karabakh, offering a heartfelt support during this incredibly difficult time. The suffering and loss endured by the Armenian people cannot be ignored, and Israel shares in your sorrow. The humanitarian crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh, marked by the displacement, fear, anguish, is a painful reminder that we must act with compassion and understanding and a commitment to justice. Israel condemns any act of violence that deepens this suffering and calls for an immediate halt to hostilities as well as for the unhindered access to humanitarian aid to alleviate the pain of those affected. We stand with Armenia in its call for peace and in the rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh to self-determination and security. Israel is committed to supporting efforts for justice, dialogue, and a peaceful resolution that honors the dignity and aspirations of all people in the region. We believe that no nation should stand alone in the face of adversity, and we are here to offer our heartfelt support. Thank you.
I now call the representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Armenia is attempting to artificial tie. It fabricated narratives to legalize its actions based on some biased pseudo experts. No one can deny the fact that all actions of Azerbaijan were compelled to take in the response to Armenia repeated unlawful use of force. Was there compliance with UN Charter, an international law which provide the state with rights and responsibility? Sir, we will do anything to ensure the safety and security of all persons under our jurisdiction and defend the sovereignty from immediate threats and aggressions. Armenia allegations about the unwillingness of Azerbaijan to genuinely and constructively engage in the peace process and recognize the territorial integrity of Armenia are worthless. They totally ignore the simple fact that despite the ruinous consequences of aggression, occupation, and mass atrocities induced on the people of our country right after the end of the conflict in 2020. It was Azerbaijan that extended the hand of peace and initiated the process of normalizing relations with Armenia. Our actions are based on mutual recognition and respect for each other's sovereignty, to territorial integrity and security of borders. However, Armenia did everything possible in words and deeds to imitate and abstract the talks backtrack from its commitment. Armenia disregarded its commitments under the November 2020 trilateral statement by refusing to comply with ceasefire and withdraw its armed forces from the areas of Azerbaijan where the peacekeepers are temporarily deployed. Moreover, Armenia continued to occupy 8 villages of Azerbaijan situated along or close to the border between the two states. Armenia is continuously using invalid or fabricated names to refer the localities within the Azerbaijan, circulating diplomatic missions of various papers on behalf of its occupation regime in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. UN mandate peacekeeping force to the sovereign territory of Azerbaijan. Armenia is giving clear indicators to the further fuel the tensions and destabilize the situation. Azerbaijan is fully committed to the objectives of peaceful, secure, stable, and prosperous region. We will continue our efforts towards and look forward for the normalization process. Thank you.
Delegate of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kazakhstan stands resolutely with Azerbaijan in its rightful position regarding Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We believe in the principles of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the inalienable principles of every nation to protect its borders and to ensure the safety of its people. The situation in Nagorno Karabakh is a matter of national importance for Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan fully supports Azerbaijan's territorial integrity within internationally recognized borders. We condemn any violations of international law and call for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Kazakhstan is committed to a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but it is crucial that any solution that respects Azerbaijan's territorial rights. We also urge all parties to be engaged in constructive dialogue under the framework of international laws. Kazakhstan remains dedicated to supporting Azerbaijan in its effort to restore peace and stability in the region. Thank you.
I call upon the delegate of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President and fellow delegates. Turkey and Azerbaijan share a strong ethnic, linguistic, and the cultural connection. We refer to the relationship as being between one nation, two states, highlighting their closely brotherly bond. İşitenze, holunda, her zaman yanında olan biri.
A person who is always there when you need him.
Üstünde her kadiran kiri.
Someone who picks you up when you fall.
Kimsip ye yapmadığında zi ayağa kaldıran.
A person who sticks you up for you when no one else will.
Bir kardeş her zaman dosttur.
A brother is always a friend.
These deep sense of kinship motivates Turkey to support Azerbaijan in its territorial disputes, including Nagorno-Karabakh issue. Thank you.
I call the both the nations to maintain peace on the borders and protect the lives of Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Now I request the delegate of India to speak.
Thank you, Honorable President and esteemed delegates of the House. India stands here today not in anger, but in profound pain and disbelief. It is tragic that I must address an issue that ought to have been buried in the annals of the history, but is now resurrected in the name of so-called freedom and democracy. The Khalistan movement was not just an attack on India's unity. It was an assault on every innocent life lost to the violence it incited. And yet, here we are witnessing the divisive ideology being nurtured and celebrated not within India, but on a foreign soil. Canada, a nation once we believed and shared our values of democracy and sovereignty, has allowed extremists to use its land as a platform for hatred. How can a nation that claims to be the champion of peace provide space for those who glorify assassinations, division, and terrorism? Canada, you may call this freedom of expression, but we call it complicity. When effigies of Indian leaders are paraded with bloodied swords, when posters openly call for violence, and when these acts are met with silence, it ceases to be freedom and it becomes a threat. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. India is not asking for favoritism, we're asking for responsibility. To harbor those who call for disintegration of a democratic nation is not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. Do not mistake our patience for weakness. India has withstood centuries of invasions, colonialism, internal strife, and yet we have emerged stronger each time. Prime Minister Trudeau, you once said, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. But we ask you this, does this extend to those who openly defy the sovereignty of another nation? Does your democracy include the right to promote hatred under the guise of freedom? India does not wish to engage in a rhetoric, but let it be known, we will not tolerate the glorification of forces that tore apart our social fabric. Thank you.
The representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, we find ourselves in the middle of a debate that should not exist. One where democracy is pitted against nationalism and criticism is mistaken for betrayal. Canada acknowledges India's concerns. But let me make this clear. Canada will not compromise on its democratic principles, no matter how inconvenient they may seem to others. India, you speak of pain and history, but is it not true that democracy thrives on the ability to question history? Canada does not support extremism. We support the right to peaceful dissent. Let us not forget that dialogue, not suppression, is the key to unity. India accuses Canada of harboring extremists, but perhaps India should reflect on why some of its citizens abroad feel the need to protest in the first place. Is it not the role of democracy to address grievances instead of silencing them? In fact, Indian Home Minister, National Security Advisor, and RAW are involved in killing of Canadians on our soil, which seriously undermines the sovereignty of Canada. I would like to quote the words of our Prime Minister. There are many supporters of Khalistan in Canada, but they do not represent the Sikh community as a whole. There is no room for violence or intolerance. Similarly, there are many supporters of Prime Minister of India in Canada, but they do not represent all Hindu Canadians. Prime Minister Trudeau has always believed in coexistence. He once said, "We need societies that recognize diversity as a source of strength, not a source of weakness." Canada is willing to work with India to address concerns, but we will not compromise on our democratic principles. To the international community, we say this: Canada does not support division, we support dialogue. We do not celebrate extremism, we uphold freedom. If these values make us uncomfortable allies, then perhaps the discomfort is worth it for the sake of democracy. Thank you.
Delegate of New Zealand.
This is not just a theoretical threat, it's a reality that Canada is grappling with today. New Zealand stands proudly with Canada, a beacon of democracy and multicultural harmony. In rejecting the Khalistan separatist agenda, Canada's strength lies in its unity through diversity. This unity must not be undermined by divisive rhetoric or extremist actions. While the Khalistan movement confronted, India's approaches also raised significant concerns, allegations of interference in the internal affairs of other nations, and the use of cohesive tactics against diaspora communities in democratic countries are unacceptable. Such actions not only escalate but risk eroding the principles and mutual respect and diplomacy. We urge India to cooperate with Canada and other international agencies in investigating the allegations. New Zealand firmly believes that we as a global community have a chance to stand together for peace, dialogue, and unity. Let us choose the path that strengthens, not weakens, our shared humanity. Canada has shown extraordinary leadership in addressing this issue with resilience and diplomacy. Together, we can prove that diversity is not a weakness, it is our greatest strength. Thank you.
Thank you. The issue of cyber security and AI webinar will be discussed in the assembly by 5 nations, namely Lebanon, Mexico, China, France, and Maldives. Firstly, I would like to call upon the representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Imagine a small boat catched in a stormy sea. The waves are fierce and the boat is struggling to stay afloat. This is Lebanon today, catched in a stormy of geopolitical tensions, advanced technologies, and rising cyber threats. Lebanon lies in a region where conflicts often ignite, and now with AI driven weaponry, these conflicts are becoming even more dangerous. Armed militants and other non-state actors could use these tools to launch precise and devastating attacks targeting our critical infrastructure, losing power, water, or communication throughout night. This could destabilize not only our government but the millions of lives. And let us not forget the banking sector. Already forgive ongoing economic crisis, a single cyber attack could shatter whatever trust remains in our financial institution. The fallout wouldn't just affect Lebanon, it would ripple across borders, shaking the global financial ecosystem. Mr. President, we are not the only in this storm. This is a global crisis, and every nation here has a stake in this solution. We must act now to regulate the usage of AI-driven weaponry, strengthening cybersecurity measures, and safeguard our shared humanity. The cost of inaction is too high. Together, we can climb the storm. Together, we can ensure the technology serves humanity, not to destroy it. Thank you.
Representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. AI-powered drones, autonomous vehicles, and robotic systems enhance China's combat capabilities, enabling precise and efficient military operations with reduced human interventions. Artificial intelligence is used for real-time data analysis, enabling better decision-making and operational efficiency during conflicts. AI weaponry gives China an advantage in asymmetric warfare, allowing it to counterbalance adversaries with superior conventional forces. Technologies like AI grinding missile systems and electronic warfare tools destruct enemy operations with defenses. This system helps the government monitor dissidents, control and arrest, and ensure social stability. The cyber security industry in China is booming, contributing to jobs creation and economic growth. Thank you.
The representative of Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President, and all the delegates of the countries present here. Today, I bring forth the concern that affects not only my nation, Mexico, but the entire world, the growing threat of AI weaponry. In Mexico, criminal organizations like drug cartels have already begun using drones for surveillance and attacks. AI powered drones would only make these operations more precise and automated, leading to more violence and chaos. AI technologies like facial recognition and predictive analytics could be exploited by criminals to target rivals or evade law enforcement, making the situation even more dangerous. Moreover, the risk extend beyond crime. If AI weaponry falls into the wrong hands, they could be used in a cross-border conflicts, threatening the stability of the nations like Mexico. Our oil and gas industries is already under attack from cyber threats, including ransomware and sabotage. Small and medium-sized business are also vulnerable, and the lack of investment in cybersecurity leaves our country open to devastating consequences. The dangers of AI weaponry go beyond immediate threats. These weapons would not only fear walls, they would create them. Smaller countries and islands without such advanced technology would be at a severe disadvantage, making them more vulnerable to powerful nations with AI weaponry. Innocent people would suffer while balance of power would shift hands into the hands of a few. Therefore, we must act now. We urge the global community to work together and dismantle AI weaponry before it becomes a tool of destruction. Let prioritize peace, security, and stability rather than enabling more conflicts and harm. Thank you.
Delegate of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I want to talk about something that could change our world for better. That is AI. We are living in a time where AI can help us solve many of the challenges we face, from making better decisions to finding new solutions for the world's problem. AI is a powerful tool that can lead us to a brighter future. Let me share a story with you. In a small village where farmers were struggling because they could not predict the weather, and their crops were often destroyed by unexpected storms. But when they started using AI technology to predict the weather, everything changed. With the help of accurate forecast, they know when to plant and harvest their crops. This allowed them to grow healthy food and improve their lives. This is just one example of how AI can help us solve many of the challenges. AI is already helping us in many ways. In healthcare, it helps doctors find the disease faster. In the fight against climate change, it helps us understand the planet's patterns by analyzing huge amount of data. AI is also helping in education, energy, and many other fields. It is a tool that can make our world smarter, safer, and more sustainable if we use it wisely. As we move forward, it is important to use AI in a fair and responsible way. We must make sure it benefits everyone, not just a few. Together, we can work to create a world where AI helps us build peace, equality, and better future for all. Thank you.
Delegate of Maldives.
Thank you, Honorable President. As tourism is the backbone of our economy, cyber attacks targeting hotel booking systems, traveler data, or payment platforms could severely impact the industry. The Maldives' efforts to digitize government services could be undermined by cyber attacks affecting public confidence and service delivery. Cybercrime such as ransomware and phishing attacks poses a threat to banks, payment systems, and financial institutions, potentially eroding trust in the country's financial system. While AI weaponry has unique implications for the Maldives, a small island nation in the Indian Ocean may not face the same level of threats as larger nations. Mr. President, we ask the world on this day that why should we produce more weapons and cyber securities for fighting? Instead, we can focus on world's peace, which quite the theme of this assembly, unity beyond borders. Hence, let us make friends instead of weapons. Let us give next generation peaceful world rather than more technologies for fight. Thank you.
Thank you. All the countries and international organizations must be cautious while using the AI for civilian purpose. We suggest to prevent the use of AI in military and take steps to strengthen cyber security. I would like to give to floor to Yemen now.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I have came today from the city of Eden a glorious one which expresses great joy, as it has been liberated from the Houthis. Yet, I am troubled to see the degree of destruction left in the wake of this criminal militia, the destruction of the city, and indeed violence against civilians. The tragedy continues, and you can imagine the number of victims just in adding hits 1,300 individuals, and you can imagine the 11,000 are wounded, and thus you can imagine the figures and other atrocities of Yemen. 3 years ago, I stood at this very podium speaking about the steps our nation had taken to ensure a smooth and peaceful process of transition. We worked tirelessly, guided by Gulf Cooperation Council's mechanism and UN National Resolution to uphold stability and democracy. Today, I stood before you once again, reflecting on our progress and challenges that remain. At that time, I told you that Houthis are getting help from other Central Asian countries and weapons through boats. To stop this, we have worked tirelessly through a peaceful political process and a peaceful nation by drafting a constitution, secular, democratic, and modern one. Houthis are attacked on schools, hospitals, and public places. Hezbollah has turned into weapon stock. Houthis are enabling regional as well as international peace and security. We attempt to deal with the Houthis. We appeal to neighboring countries such that they assist us in tackling Houthis militia, undermining a national legitimacy. The response to our brother of Saudi Arabia on the behalf of many people, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude to his help as well as member of the coalition who continued their efforts to assist the many people. We find ourselves mixed in this battle. This fight is for our country and the legitimacy of the state to ensure a country that not fall into the hands of Iran, which would like to see the destruction of the city. Ladies and gentlemen, extend your hands to support us from these armed forces. Thank you.
Delegate of Saudi Arabia.
Honorable President, esteemed delegates. Imagine a child in Yemen who should be playing and dreaming of a bright future. Instead, the child grows up surrounded by violence and destruction. This is the heartbreaking reality for millions of Yemeni people today. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia stands with Yemen, committed to supporting its people and protecting its sovereignty and unity. Sadly, this vision of peace is threatened every day by the Houthi militia. Backed by external forces, they block humanitarian aid, target innocent civilians, and bring more suffering to Yemen. These actions not only harm the people of Yemen but also destabilize the region. Saudi Arabia strongly opposes such behavior and calls for an end to these illegal and harmful activities. Our country has been working hard to support Yemen by providing humanitarian aid, rebuilding critical infrastructure, and encouraging dialogue among Yemeni groups. We believe that lasting peace can only come from unity and reconciliation. However, peace cannot happen while violence and aggression continue to take place over diplomacy. We urge all nations here today to unite in standing with Yemen's legitimate government and its people. مع أن نستطيع أن ندين أفعال ميليشيا الحوثي التي تزر ونساعد في سي اليمن نحن على استقرار والسلام.
Together, we can condemn the harmful actions of the Houthi militia and help Yemen move towards stability and peace.
لنعمل لنحيي أطفال اليمن مستقبلا مليا بالرجاء والأمان والفرص. شكرا.
Let us work to give the children of Yemen a future filled with hope, safety, and opportunity. Thank you.
Representative of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Yemen and Saudi Arabia for sharing your opinions, even if they are the one who had attacked on the civilians and innocent Houthis. They are continuing their oppression as they are the minorities. They are proclaiming that Houthis have attacked on the ships of Yemen, but their actual idea is to attack on Houthis. The Houthis are developing their army to strengthen their national security to maintain a peace and internal security. The Houthis have shown resilience in the face of unjust military campaigns and blockades that have exacerbated Yemen's humanitarian crisis. Iran firmly believes that peace in Yemen requires an inclusive dialogue among all Yemeni parties without external interference. We urge the international community to prioritize lifting blockades, ending hostilities, addressing the sufferings of Yemeni people. Together, we must support a just, equitable resolution led by people of Yemen themselves. Thank you.
Delegate of Egypt.
The Arab Republic of Egypt expresses deep concern over the actions of the Houthis in the blocking Red Sea, a crucial maritime trade route vital for global commerce and regional stability. Egypt condemned these disruptions, which not only threaten the safety of international navigation but also undermine the well-beingness of countries reliant on this key waterway. The Egypt calls for immediate cessation of such hostile actions and urges the international community to take decisive steps to preserve Red Sea as a free and open passage for all nations. We also reaffirm our support for peaceful resolution to the Yemeni conflict through the dialogue and adherence to the UN Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2216, emphasizing the importance of stability, cooperation, and cessation of hostilities. Egypt remains committed to ensuring regional peace and supporting humanitarian efforts while striving for the long-term security of Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, respected delegates. I now give the floor to representative of Australia to speak.
Honorable Chair, esteemed delegates, and global citizens. Picture this: a massive cargo ship carrying food, medicine, and vital supplies sails under a golden sunrise. The ocean is calm, the journey smooth, but suddenly chaos. A swarm of small boats rushes in, armed men climb aboard, guns raised, radios jump, crew members forced to their knees, a message sent to the world: pay up or they die. This is not a scene from a movie, Mr. President. This is happening now here off the coast of Somalia. This is piracy in the 21st century. And the world watches as billion-dollar industries, innocent sailors, and global trade route fall victim to criminals with AK-47. Let's call it what it is. Somalia's failure has become the world's problem. A country where law has collapsed, where warlords rule, where justice is as fleeting as the tide. A nation that has let its waters become a hunting ground for criminals, a trap for innocent, a black hole in the global economy. For years, we have heard the same excuses, Mr. President, that Somalia is unstable, Somalia is struggling, Somalia is poor. But tell me, delegates, how long will the world tolerate a failed state that endangers every ship crossing the Indian Ocean? How, how long will the world allows how long will we allow our seas to be dictated by outlaws while Somalia stands idle? These pirates are not desperate fishermen. They're organized criminals. They have networks, financiers, and markets where stolen goods are sold without shame. They're not the victims of a broken system. They are the system. Australia has fought to keep its waters safe. We have patrolled, defended, and protected. But we cannot fight alone. The world must recognize that Somalia is the problem. Somalia's corruption, its lack of ability to govern, its refusal to take control of its own shores. This is why piracy thrives. Ask yourselves, how many more ships must be hijacked? How many more sailors must be taken hostage? How many more ransoms must be paid before the world says enough? The oceans does not belong to Somalia. They don't belong to criminals. They belong to the world. And if Somalia refuses to protect them, then Somalia must be held accountable. No more excuses, Mr. President. No more waiting. The tide is rising and it will not wait for a broken nation to fix itself. Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity.
Delegate of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me tell you about my country, Somalia, a land with beautiful shores and broken dreams. Once upon a time, a fisherman lived off the sea. They rose before dawn, casting nets with hope. But then foreign vessel came, stealing fish, polluting water, and leaving our people with empty nets and empty plates. Desperation grew, and in that desperation, some turned to piracy. They believed they had no choice, no future, no hope. Imagine a father unable to feed his children, choosing between wrong and starvation. It's not right, it's not just, but it's real. Somalia knows the pain piracy has they caused, not just to the world, but to us. We have become a nation whispered about in fear, painted and lawless. But we are not pirates. We are the people survive. And survival sometimes leads a mistake. We stand here to say, help us. Support us in rebuilding our nation. Give our fishermen to the chance their nets. Not their doubt. Help us protect our water so we can stand strong against crime. In Al Somali Tarjid in Tahyar.
Somalia wants to turn the tide.
Al Maura Nariyad in Natuhul min Khawli Ili Manarat.
We want to move from being a source of fear to a beacon of hope.
Dayona Naimal Khalkha Mustaqbil Haisalana Baharna Khal Haisalana Al Tajarat Wal Salam Walay Salam. Ini Hal Mayatna Jamiyan Fal Naiman Ma'an Ilmi Shafan.
Together, let us create a future where our seas bring food, trade, and peace, not despair.
Shukriya.
Thank you.
Delegate of Colombia.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. In Colombia, the sea is more than just water. It's life. It's where our coffee, our flowers, and our culture set to sail to the whole world. But what happens when the sea becomes a place of fear? What happens when pirates turn our lifeline into battleground? Imagine a Colombian ship carrying coffee. Each bean is a symbol of hard work and tradition. From the mountains to the port, that coffee is being touched by hundreds of hands. But when the pirates strike it, it's not just the coffee they take, it's the hope, pride, and the livelihoods of families who depend on that shipment. Piracy is a crime against us all. It threatens the trade that sustains nations, disrupts life, and spreads chaos on the water. Colombia will not stand for it. We call on this assembly to act, strengthen international cooperation, enforce laws, and ensure no ship sails in fear. The sea belongs to everyone, and it's our shared duty to protect it. Together, we can turn the tide and ensure the ocean remains a bridge but not a barrier. Thank you.
Representative of Cuba.
Thank you, Honorable President. Let me share a Cuban story, one of a sweat, pride, and a resilience. On a small farm in Cuba, a family rises to dawn to cut a sugar cane and dreaming of sending their rum across the seas. Another family hand rolls cigar, perfecting every detail to share our culture with the world. These are the stories behind every ship that leaves Cuba. But what happens when these ships pass through Colombian waters? Instead of smooth sailing, they face danger. Pirate strike, armed and ruthless, fueled by a shadowy world of illegal trade. Trade that, let's be honest, Colombia has turned a blind eye to for far too long. Colombia, your lands are rich in beauty, but your waters are rich in crime. You speak against piracy, yet your shores have become a heaven for illicit activities. It's like crying about a fire while handing out matches. Cuba will not stay silent. We demand accountability. Clean up your waters, your trade, and your image. Because every time a ship is hijacked, it's not just a cargo that's stolen. It's a dream of countless people who work to create it. To the rest of this assembly, I repeat, to the rest of this assembly, let's act, let's ensure the seas are not a lawless playground, but a safe space for all. Let's protect the hardworking people whose livelihoods depends on safe waters. And let's remind Colombia that the oceans deserve more than excuses, they deserve action. Thank you.
Delegate of Indonesia.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Indonesia came to this dispute with the unique perspective of a nation made up of 17,000 islands. Yes, you heard that right, 17,000. If anyone knows how to deal with pirates, it's us. Frankly, we have been doing it since long before Hollywood romanticized them. Pirates in the Strait of Malacca, we have dealt with that. Smugglers in the South China Sea, been there and done that. But here is the thing, piracy is not just about bad guys on boats. It's about weak system and desperate economies. Pirates don't just appear, they're created by circumstances. Indonesia has cracked down on these crimes with regional cooperation because no one can secure seas alone. We call upon this body to invest on capacity building, intelligence sharing, and sustainable development. Because if we don't address the roots of piracy, we'll be stuck fighting with symptoms forever. And let's be honest, who really wants a sequel to Pirates in the Malacca Strait? Thank you.
Thank you. We are expecting some kind of security measures to be taken by all the countries which have powerful navies, and other countries must come forward to support them. I now open the floor to discuss on recent happening in South China Sea, including places like Partial Islands, Second Thomas Shola, Natuna Islands, and conflicting claims on surrounding nations. The delegate of Philippines.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving the floor to raise one of the most important concerns. Philippines does not yield or waver on its stand on territorial basis on West Philippine Sea because it is our waters. The Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in 2016 rejected the expensive claims of China, which do not have any basis under international law. However, those whose heart is filled with greed for global domination and expansion do not care anyone, including international community and organization. Mr. President, they are stopping our fishing boats, injuring our fishermen, attacking our naval vessels, denying us to send necessities to our island population. We warn the China not to cross a red line in the South China Sea.
If any Filipino died as a result of Beijing willful action, Manila would consider it as close to as an act of war. Accordingly, in our desire to de-escalate the situation, we have made a provisional agreement with China to de-escalate the situation in 2024. We are ready to implement it and expect China to do same by abiding by the international laws. Thank you.
Delegate of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Japan expresses serious concern over repeated actions in recent days that increases regional tensions in South China Sea, we oppose any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force. We also oppose the dangerous use of vessels of Coast Guard and maritime militia as well as aircrafts by China. The stabilizing presence of United States is crucial to regional peace. It is never a choice but a necessity. It is highly desirable that the People's Republic of China cooperate with all the countries to establish the lasting world peace. We oppose the acceleratory actions of China to deny the legitimate share of natural resources and maritime territories to its neighbors. We are facing more and more occurrences of confrontations, political disputes, and security threats. Kinrin shokoko yo kyohaku suru iwairu, kyokoko no musakin na kodo niyori, funso ya aratana funso chitai, no risuku ga shojite imasu.
Risk of conflict and new hotspots are arising due to the irresponsible behavior of the so called powerful state that bullies its neighbors.
Aggressive and dangerous behavior of China is undermining the free flow of goods through international waters. The security of South China Sea, through which about one third of global maritime trade and about 37% of petroleum and petroleum products are shipped globally, is a global issue, a matter of concern for international community as well. Thank you.
Delegate of Malaysia.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the floor. The U-shaped 9-dash line which China proposes does not have any historical evidences to prove its claims and are clearly part of its salami slicing strategy to fulfill its expansionist desires. It claims the entire sea of about 90% and includes the exclusive economic zones of several countries. Malaysia will not stop South China Sea exploration in our legitimate territory. We will have to operate in our waters and secure economic advantage, including drilling for oil in our territory of Borneo coast. This issue is very complex and sensitive, and irresponsible behavior by anyone would only complicate the resolution of the issue. We do not recognize their claims and will continue to find ways to de-escalate tensions in the contested areas without compromising our position and principles. We are firmly committed to protect our sovereignty as depicted by our map in 1979. We will negotiate with other ASEAN members and China to resolve this issue peacefully. Thank you.
The representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Vietnam does not back off from asserting our rights and interests in the same fair and pacific way that we have always done. We have a vision for peace, security, and prosperity in South China Sea, but this was being undermined by China. Unfortunately, this vision remains a distant reality. Aggressive, illegal, coercive, and deceptive actions continue to violate our sovereignty, integrity, and jurisdiction. There is an extremely dangerous situation on all along the borders of China, and leaders from there constantly threaten to overthrow the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Those who utter these arrogant words from their mouth must understand that the people of our country stood united against the powerful colonizers for over 2 decades and gained our statehood. Those who oppose and condemn the blocking of fishing boats and beating of Vietnamese fishermen must understand that the people of our country stood united against the powerful colonizers for over 2 decades. China has become the looter of even the fishes caught by them. We did not expect the China to act like a dacoit and the pirate on the sea. The peace and stability of South China Sea and the freedom of navigation now is a world issue. We call for the preservation of peace and security in South China Sea and keep the situation under control until we find effective methods and solutions to resolve the disputes through high-level meetings between relevant authorities. Thank you.
The delegate of Indonesia.
Thank you, sir.
Today we stand with a heavy heart to condemn the heinous acts in the South China Sea. The vengeful and barbaric actions of Chinese by targeting the Navy personnel of Philippines at 2nd Thomas Shallow, which rightfully belongs to Philippines, are causing serious human rights violation, aiming laser lights to cause blindness, using water canals to block the supply vessels and ramming the boats to damage them, are actions of an uncivilized nation. Targeting poor fishermen who are dependent on seas for decades for their livelihood is such a low to human dignity. Building artificial islands to establish military bases and raising military activities would only amount to increasing tensions in the already contested waters. Indonesia has full sovereignty over the Natuna Islands, which China claims as part of its territory. The Natuna Islands act as our maritime border with other neighbors, and there is no dispute among them being claimed by others. Thank you, sir.
Delegate of Cambodia.
Mr. President, this is one of the most hotly contested geopolitical issues in Asia Pacific region, involving regional and global powers. Cambodia is not immune to this complex dispute. Cambodia, as the chair of ASEAN in 2022, has played a vital role in negotiation process to finalize the code of conduct for South China Sea. We underscore the ASEAN to be instrumental for regional peace and cooperation, but not the arbitrator in sovereignty disputes. We see this issue to be solved in a regional context and are against its over internationalization. The continued stability of this region requires China and United States to manage their rivalry in a responsible manner. We suppose that climate states should address the disputes bilaterally. We do not want this issue to be intensified by involvement of foreign and non-regional powers. We hope that countries comply with the rule of sea law at sea to lead the peaceful settlement of disputes in South China Sea by sticking to dialogue and avoid confrontation. Thank you.
Delegate of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia shares the condemnation of countries in Asia Pacific of the efforts of China to destabilize peace and tranquility. It is not surprising to expect this kind of behavior from an expansionist nation that undermines the international laws and continues to violate sovereignty and human rights. We oppose the coercive military actions of China and ask them to abide by the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. We call for the tensions in strategic waterway to be settled through diplomatic channels. The rivalry is constraining the strategic choices of regional states. The rise of power politics, egoistic nationalism are challenging international law and eroding the faith in international institutions and multilateral cooperation. They are causing immense sufferings to millions of people directly or indirectly. We appreciate the Philippine government for constantly being in compliance with the award of arbitrary tribunal that was given in 2016. It is final and legally binding on all parties to dispute under the provisions of UN clause. We continue to work with the United Nations to protect the free and open international border based on the rule of law. Thank you.
People's Republic of China.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving us the opportunity to refuse the false, ill-intentional and malicious allegations on China. The statements of the speaker shows completely towards us without considering the actual happenings. Mr. President, there is a full historical and legal basis for China to uphold territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in South China Sea. We signed the declaration and on the conduct of parties in South China Sea with the Asian countries in view of safeguarding neighborhood friendliness and regional cooperation. We insist on managing differences properly through dialogue and consultation with parties involved. We solemnly point out that ad hoc arbitral tribunal in 2016 had exercised its jurisdiction ultra vires and made an illegitimate ruling, had sustainable flaws in law and was politically motivated. The ruling itself violates the UN clause and was illegal and invalid. The Philippines unilaterally changed the status quo by grounding its warships illegally and building permanent outposts. Certain external countries and their puppets in the region are stirring up the trouble and creating disruptions. They even attempted the deploy missile system, provoking confrontations and disrupting the peace in the South China Sea. The South China Sea is the one of the freest and safest maritime routes in the world, and there is no need to worry about the freedom of navigations and our flight in it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.